We begin this morning with the news that the Academic Staff Union of Universities ASUU has suspended its 8-month-old strike. Though the union, I should say, is yet to make an official announcement, a report from Punch newspaper said the decision was taken at the end of the National Executive Council meeting, which was held at ASUU Secretariat in Abuja. A member of ASUU NEC who was at the meeting stated that the suspension of the strike was based on last week's ruling of the Court of Appeal, which asked the union to obey an order of National Industrial Court. Dr. Abati, interesting times.
Well, ASUU, it's very straightforward. We have made the point on this program that, look, number one, the federal government went to court, the National Industrial Court. The National Industrial Court ruled that ASUU must return to status quo ante bellum, which was the simple import of the ruling of the National Industrial Court. The court granted the interlocutory injunction that had been sought by the federal government through the Ministry of Labor. ASUU went on appeal. Now, was it last Friday or so? The Court of Appeal ruled that ASUU should first of all obey the ruling of the National Industrial Court and gave ASUU 7 days within which to now formally present its appeal. The same Court of Appeal endorsed the withdrawal of the motion on the stay of execution by Femi Falana SAL, cancelled to ASUU, and then said, okay, after 7 days, you can now, come on appeal. Okay? So, as I said twice on this program, it's a situation of obey first and then complain. It is also a face-saving, ruling for ASUU. I had argued with one or two counsel that, look, it looks like the Court of Appeal ruled on the basis of public policy. But okay, we went on and on that it's not public policy because the judiciary, the courts are also social modulators. They wouldn't want to disrupt the system in certain circumstances. But now, the deadline for ASUU ends today. And what ASUU has done is to obey the Court of Appeal, to save its own face, and secondly, to project itself as, a law and order obeying institution. Okay? Because if they were to disobey the Court of Appeal, the Court of Appeal had put a clause there that then ASUU will be charged for contempt of court. So they have cleverly avoided that charge. However, after the meetings held in all the branches of ASUU across the country and the National Executive Council meeting that was held in Abuja yesterday, ASUU has now said, okay, based on the feedback that we have received, okay, we have decided to suspend the strike conditionally after 8 months. What are the conditions? One, ASUU expects that the federal government will pay the arrears that is being owed. That the federal government will vacate the no work, no pay condition that it offered. 3, that the federal government will meet all the, negotiations, the demands that have been on the table since 2009. 4, ASUU expects that there will be outcomes, fruits, progressive outcomes from the intervention of the House of Reps, the leadership of the House of Reps, having met with the President of Nigeria, President Buhari, and the President of Nigeria having promised that he will look into the matter and he will make efforts. What is the summary of all of this? The summary of all of this is that the matter has not ended. While trying to save his face, ASUU is also trying to be clever by saying, well, okay, we have obeyed the court, we are a lawful and a law-abiding institution, But at the same time, there are conditions. So if the federal government does not play ball, what it means is that this strike will continue. If it doesn't continue now, maybe another day it will come up again. What is ASUU asking for? Beyond arrears, salary arrears. ASUU is asking for the revitalization of the university system, which is something that we can all understand. Okay, beyond salaries, beyond payment platform, and then second, of course, the major victims of this are parents and students. So if you don't resolve this problem, yes, the public sector universities will continue to suffer. The private sector, universities will continue to thrive. More parents will prefer the option of sending their children to school abroad.
I mean, going through this cycle just shows how backward we've become as a country, where we don't respect the rights of our students. We don't even appreciate education, despite the fact that education has given us a lot. We have a debt of talent everywhere because we can single-handedly allow our universities to go on with no lectures for over 8 months. Like Dr. Bati said, the battle is not over. In fact, it's just started. ASUU is doing this because the Court of Appeal says, go back to work. But definitely, ASUU will file its appeal, and the case will continue. Most grounds have not been reached. Our universities, federal universities, I should say, in a shambolic state. We saw the needs assessment reports that most universities don't even have the needed number of lecturers, professors, and the likes. So, a country that truly values education will not go to court over the rights of students for better education. It's time for us to introspect, and this government should do the needful. The Court of Appeal in Abuja has declared as unlawful the abduction of separatist leader Nnamdi Kanu from Kenya. The court consequently quashed all charges filed against him by the federal government. The court also ruled that the federal government did not have the jurisdiction to try Kanu. In a unanimous judgment, the 3-man panel for the appellate court held that the federal government breached all local and international laws in forceful rendition of Kanu to Nigeria. Kanu leads the proscribed indigenous peoples group of Biafra, which is campaigning for the creation of an independent state in Southeast Nigeria. Dr. Batu.
Okay, a number of basic points in this regard. The legal part and the political part. Let's start with law. What the Court of Appeal, the 3-man panel of justices have decided is that jurisdiction is central to the judicial process. Any student of elementary law, maybe at the graduate level, will tell you about the importance of jurisdiction. Jurisdiction can be invoked at any time, before, during, and after a case in court. And if you fail at the level of jurisdiction, which speaks to the authority of the court to deliver justice and follow our basic procedures, everything else that is determined by that court, will be considered null and void. And so what the Court of Appeal has done is to talk about jurisdiction, to say that in this particular case, the extraordinary rendition of Nnamdi Kanu from Kenya, note my word, extraordinary rendition. Some people say abduction, but the word that the court uses is extraordinary rendition. So the issue at stake was rendition. That rendition is a violation of Section 15 of the Terrorism Act, and it's also a violation of established protocols and conventions in international law to which, Nigeria is signatory. What are the rules? Before you can, engage in rendition of a person in another, jurisdiction, you will first have to convict the person. You have to follow due process. What the Court of Appeal is saying, basically, is that in the rendition of Nnamdi Kanu, due process was not followed. Government can exercise power, but the court has a responsibility to uphold the law. And that's basically what the court had said. Now, in April the Federal High Court inquiring into this matter, the Court of Justice Binta Nyako, has said, okay, out of the 15 charges raised against Nnamdi Kanu, that only a few of them, could be considered. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, and 15. Then Ozekome SAN went to court and said, no, there are issues in this regard with the jurisdiction of the court. So what the court has done, the Court of Appeal has simply done, is to say that, in fact, the trial court, head in law, arrived at his position per incuriam, by even seeking to entertain the case, that he should have looked at the original basis of the trial, which is the extraordinary rendition from Kenya, which amounted to a violation of international law, of the extradition of the Terrorism Act, Section 15 thereof. So then the court said, all those sections that I mentioned, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, and 15, now on the basis of that, the matter, the accused person has been discharged. Okay, let me just not go too far into all of this. However, what is the implication? What we have seen in terms of the reaction from the Office of the Attorney General of the Federation is an indication that this does not mean that the case has ended. The Office of the Attorney General is saying that yes, the accused person may have been discharged, but he has not been acquitted. And that there are other counts. There are 15 charges. Just the summary, is that those sections, or those charges, that were made an issue by the Court of Justice, Binta Nyako, were the ones that the court has addressed. That there are other charges. The Office of the Attorney General of the Federation has also said they will go all the way to the Supreme Court. So the matter continues. Okay? However, counsel in the matter, Michael Zekome SAN, had even advised before now that the federal government should invoke Section 174 of the Constitution, which gives the Attorney General of the Federation the powers to enter a nolle prosequi. The powers of a nolle prosequi means that the Attorney General, can discontinue a case at any point within the trial. So in this regard, 2 points, major points of law that the Court of Appeal, with regard to jurisdiction and fidelity to international conventions and protocols that the court has maintained. But let's look at the politics of it. The politics of it, very briefly, is that the way the federal government of Nigeria is handling this matter, the federal government of Nigeria is unwittingly iconizing Nnamdi Kanu. There was jubilation in the Southeast yesterday. Nnamdi Kanu is being turned into a hero. Southeast leaders have approached the federal government. They have approached the president. Let us find a political solution to this matter. If you continue to pursue it legally, there will be all these booby traps. Okay? So the question is, Nnamdi Kanu, yes, they may not release him. They may go to the Supreme Court. They may say he's not been acquitted, but they are increasing his value. And he may well, on the basis of all of this, emerge as the next leader of the Southeast in political terms and in community terms. So even if he loses one way or the other, he gains, he wins. That's the way I see it.
I mean, one thing is certain. I like to dial back. If there was no talk about marginalization on ground, we will not have this case in the first place. And I stated the other time, the very strong point made about the marginalization of the Igbo people. It drew a lot of reaction. But I keep asking, is it not true that the Igbo people have been marginalized? I mean, we can't deny it. We have to be objective. We have to say it the way it is. The truth, most of the time, is not always favorable. And the truth on ground is, the Igbos have been marginalized. And that's why, be it Nnamdi Kanu, or Ralph Wazirike many years ago, there's always a case made by anybody that comes out to reiterate the fact that marginalization goes on. But what is incumbent on any government to do is fairness and justice. Fairness and justice. And we should ask ourselves, as a nation after the war, have we been fair and just to the Igbo people? Have we? Like the court ruled, extraordinary rendition. Should we as a nation even forcefully bring people like that back home, violating their rights? I'm sure the federal government makes the argument, yeah, he jumped bail. But was that the best way to go about it? Could we do things better? Now this case will snowball. The Ministry of Justice has said, okay, we will fight this up to the Supreme Court. But we should ask ourselves the pertinent question. After this Nnamdi Kanu case, and whatever happens after the case, does it really solve the feeling of marginalization of the Igbo people on ground? Mostly in building a nation, we should be asking, what can we do to bring about inclusiveness? Some people have posted a strong argument of an Igbo presidency. Some people have said otherwise. But what is really incumbent is that, on all of us to do, is that for us to make this country grow, we should find a way possible that makes every part of the country feel included. Number one, part of the Commonwealth and the common existence of this country. As long as we have parts that feel they're not included, they're not respected, there's going to be problems. The Igbos are crying marginalization. Let's not forget at some point, the Yorubas too will cry. The Hausas too will cry. Except we have a government for all, then we will not move forward. This country is great. This country is blessed. But we can build it by including everybody. The head of the International Monetary Fund is warning that inflation threatens to become a runaway train and that the global economy has been struck by another one after one. Christina Georgieva, speaking on the day 4 of the IMF World Bank meetings taking place in Washington, says that the risk of global recession is now 25%, with high recession risk for many individual countries. Arise correspondent KG Nana reports that emerging markets and developing economies are under particular stress.
World recession,
pandemic,
the rise in interest rates,
Russia's invasion of Ukraine,
world recession,
climate disasters on all continents,
high energy prices,
and now a cost of living crisis.
And Russia's invasion.
These are some terms taking the main stage at the 2022 International Monetary Fund World Bank Group annual meetings. The effects of these shocks on developed markets and the harsh reality facing emerging markets are on the table.
We have identified 48 countries that are particularly severely impacted by food insecurity. You wouldn't be surprised that quite a large number of them are in sub-Saharan Africa.
The interest rates are up, the burden of the debt is higher, and the currencies are weakening for quite a few of the countries. And the world doesn't have a technique now to provide debt relief, even when debt is unsustainable. We've seen multiple countries asking the world community for debt relief and not finding a mechanism to do that.
Nigeria's finance minister admits the country is feeling the pressure, and her priority is to extend tenures of its outstanding debts and not to restructure.
Again, what we're doing is not debt restructuring, is managing our liability. When you have pressures on the debt service to revenue ratio, what you do is try to stretch the repayment periods. It gives you more fiscal room. And we've been doing that systematically. We've been able to do that more on the domestic market, at the domestic end. We've been able to shift our borrowings from short term to longer term. So it gives us fiscal room. Now we have to look at bilateral as well as multilateral borrowings and see whether there's opportunities for us to do that as well. It helps the liquidity management. The common framework, our assessment is that it's not beneficial for Nigeria, and the way it's designed is not suited for us. So far, this framework has been on for about 2 years, and so far only 3 countries have managed it. So, and the message is that it needs to be looked at. The way it's structured, very few countries are able to even take advantage of it.
Meanwhile, the country's Apex Bank governor is optimistic about the projected downward trend in inflation rate.
Well, I must say that even at these meetings, it's very clear that inflation risk is heavily elevated. And for us in Nigeria, we believe that inflation at 20.5% in the month of September or August is a very high one. And that's why you would have seen that monetary policy has taken some very stern positions to aggressively tighten, not just tightening through increasing the policy rate, but also tightening by seeing to how we could take out liquidity from the vaults of the banks. So we're delighted that people are beginning to see that this tightening efforts will yield results. 17% looks good, but we believe that with what we are doing, our monetary policy, we believe that the tightening efforts that will help to really control demand will effectively lead to even a further reduction below 17%. Very heartwarming, because at least they've seen that we are doing something that is, I'll use the word, in line or in tandem with what the global central banks are doing in the area of tackling inflation. And so it's heartwarming, and we can only just continue to do what we're doing, because what that does is, to us, is that it gives us the confidence that the action we're taking is actually going to yield results, and we can only just continue to push in those directions.
Earlier in the week, the World Bank Group president urged Nigeria to end its multiple exchange rate system. In response, Governor Emefiele says the country does not benefit from a one-size-fits-all policy.
At every point when we come into some of these meetings, sometimes they tell us, you go back home and adopt your homegrown policies. We cannot, and I've said this before, we cannot be accused of not doing what they want, which is to take decisions about how to handle exchange rate management. But at different times, you have to think of at what point will you take those decisions. We're going to be looking at them and thinking of the right times to do what they are suggesting. Otherwise, if we do it exactly when they want it, it may turn out to be very hurtful to the Nigerian economy.
The policy recommendation from the IMF World Bank Group Annual Meeting 2022 for emerging economies is to act fast, act now, and act together. The emerging economies have been facing what is called an overlapping crisis: Russia's invasion of Ukraine, climate disasters, food insecurity. But how long can these economies hang on? Nkechi Nana, Arise News, Washington, D.C.
Well, good morning, Nkechi. Thank you for your brilliant report. A lot of focus on high debt levels in emerging economies at the meetings. What can you tell us about that?
Yes, a lot of focus on high debt levels, and rightly so. I mean, it's tough for everybody, but it's even tougher for countries that have been hit by a stronger dollar, high borrowing costs, food insecurity. It's a triple blow, and particularly heavy for countries that are under a high level of debt like Nigeria. Now, according to the IMF, 60% of low-income countries are near debt distress. And so you can see how this is a concern for these institutions. In Nigeria, we're now spending more on debt servicing than we're getting as revenue. And that's just a potential danger for the country. Nigeria's finance minister, as you saw in the reports, admits that, yes, we're feeling the pressure, and explains that not only is our market cost too high, our debt service obligations are in foreign currencies, and it's increasing. And so the country just cannot wait any longer to better manage our liabilities, like she explained, focusing on domestic liabilities and just trying to shift those loans from short-term to medium and longer tenures. And she says they're going to try to do the same thing for our international borrowings, just to give Nigeria a sort of stretch out on the repayment of obligations while the country focuses on increasing revenue. And it's just important to demonstrate that we understand the urgency to act. And that's something that Kristalina Georgieva, the head of the IMF, has stayed on throughout the meetings, because, I mean, we're talking about measures, policies that will make a difference in the lives of myself, yourself, Dr. Abati Rufai, and just the lives of hundreds of millions of people.
Right. Getchi, world inflation rose to 8.8% in 2022, but is now projected to decline to like 6.5% in 2023 and 4.5% in 2024. Some sort of positive growth, isn't it?
I wish I could bring you some positive news on that end, Rufai, but just don't get your hopes up high because, yes, inflation rates are being projected to come down, but they're still coming down from high levels. Now, the IMF sees a 10% chance of a global contraction in growth next year and a 25% chance of growth falling below 2%. Now, this has only happened a handful of times since the 1970s. And so even when growth seems positive, we'll still feel like we're in a recession. And in particular to Nigeria, where there's a projected downward trend in inflation rates to 17% in 2023. I mean, it's a relief because when the news broke out that the country's inflation rates rising to a 17-year high back in July at 19.64%, it was quite scary. But what needs to be focused on now is that the country just needs to be more innovative with revenue earnings. This has been a calling at the meetings. Borrowing during inflation is just not a good look. And so for us to even see the benefits or any seeming growth, there has to be some sort of targeted measures that are being put in place.
Well, the IMF and World Bank officials, they've been meeting with the Commonwealth ministers of finance and central bankers. What are some of the policy recommendations coming out of those meetings and now tailored a day to the concerns of these countries?
I mean, they were really specifically sort of tailored to sub-Saharan Africa, emerging economies, but they were pretty basic, just going back to just sticking to prudent macroeconomic policies, focusing on the fundamentals and just to be prepared. If you're prepared and when there's a climate disaster or when you have a pandemic and you have your fundamentals put in place, you have social safety nets, you have equitable access to healthcare, education. I heard you earlier talking about the ASUU strikes and the impact. You're just better prepared for some of these multiple shocks that we're seeing now. And also, if you're seeing a problem, like we discussed earlier on the debt side, it's just better to act early. Don't hesitate. Don't wait. And also, you can use the support systems that these multilateral banks, the IMF, have put in place. You have the food shock window, and you can just use that to kind of cushion the effects of these crises. And something that's very important, and I think it's understated, is the impact that Africa can have on itself. Africa can really help itself. We have some of these policy decisions like the Continental Free Trade Agreement. And so what the minister was saying yesterday was Africa just needs to reach out more and open up more and also focus on its strength. Some of our strengths in Nigeria is, for example, the young people. We have a large young people demographic, and how can you use this strength to benefit your people, invest in young people, invest in digital connectivity, invest in competitiveness for the future, and just act fast. You see something is happening, it's just spiraling. Act fast, don't hesitate, be intentional and be targeted.
Right, that's all on News Headline. Thank you so much, Nkechi, for your time. Stay well in Washington, D.C.